Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
Welcome back to Morning Barbados. So good to have you with us. I trust you've already had your cup of coffee or your cup of tea or whatever you need to get you going. Now, these days, traffic is absolutely crazy. So make sure you get out of the house early if you have to. Good thing we're on Facebook. So if you have to go back and look after, you can still get all this wonderful information as you go through your day or later in the evening when you're relaxing. It's time now for conversations on CARICOM, and we'd like to welcome the ambassador to come on in and share with us. You're so accustomed to seeing Ambassador Comissiong's face. He needs no formal introduction, but pleasantries. Good morning to you and welcome.
Yes, good morning, Tisha. It's a pleasure to see you. I normally see Pearson's face. It's nice to see a female face.
I agree. All right,
Yes,
so let's get into, I remember speaking with you a few years ago. This was obviously pre-COVID. Everybody says that now. When we had the rep from Cuba here in Barbados come into the studio on 94.7 FM, and we talked all about the Cubana crash and the significance October 6th and stuff like that. And at that time, there were so many things that I learned about it that I think Barbadians do not even know, even as much as the monument in Paynes Bay. So this morning, I'm so happy that we're revisiting that. I know that the anniversary is coming up on October 6th. So let's talk all about the activities that are planned leading up to and after.
well, Tisha, as you know, every year we commemorate that tragedy that occurred in Barbados 46 years ago on the 6th of October 1976 when a Cubana airline, a civilian airline full of passengers, was blown out of the skies of Barbados, and all 73 persons on board perished. And so this is an annual commemoration, but this year is a very special commemoration because this year it's the 50th anniversary year of the establishment of diplomatic and other relations between Barbados and Cuba and CARICOM and Cuba. Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, and Jamaica led the way in 1972 in establishing those relations. And what makes it special this year as well is that we are marking the passing of the great Bobby Clarke. And you really cannot talk about Cuba without talking about and reflecting on Bobby Clarke because he really was the architect. If there's a primary architect of relations between both Barbados and Cuba, but CARICOM and Cuba, you really have to give the credit to Bobby Clarke. He first visited Cuba in 1964, just 5 years after the triumph of the revolution. And from that visit, he really started to work on developing this relationship between our Caribbean region and Cuba. So if today we see all the benefits of that relationship, the medical teams, the hundreds of Barbadians who have gone on scholarship to Cuba, the technical cooperation, the coaches, the Cuban coaches in Barbados, a lot of that credit has to go to Bobby. So the commemorations this year, on this Thursday, the 6th of October, we have our usual commemoration at the Paynes Bay Monument at 10 o'clock in the morning. But it's special again because we have just carried out a refurbishing and an improvement of the Cubana Monument at Paynes Bay. So we will be rededicating that monument this year. The presiding over that rededication will be the Bishop of the Methodist Church, Bishop Derek Richards. We will also have our special guest of honor, Dame Billy Miller. She was the Minister of Foreign Affairs who actually conceptualize that monument. So it will be a very special commemorative ceremony on Thursday at Paynes Bay, commencing at 10 o'clock. Also, a highlight of the coming days will be the tribute to Bobby Clarke. We will be paying tribute to Bobby Clarke at Golden Square on Sunday, the 9th of October. Golden Square is the home of the heroes, so that's the right place to pay tribute to Bobby. And a number of dignitaries from across the Caribbean will be coming to Barbados to pay tribute. Prime Minister Ralph Gonzalez from St. Vincent, for example, Kafra Cambon from Trinidad, Peggy Nesfield from Grenada. Several Caribbean personalities will be coming to Barbados to pay tribute to Bobby. And there are other activities we have for over the next few days, but I'll begin with those two.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the developments that we would have seen over the years, just the major ones in that relationship that we talked about, the establishment of the diplomatic relationship with Cuba. Let's talk about some of the inroads that we've made over the years, the major things that have happened.
Well, when our four then independent English-speaking Caribbean countries recognized Cuba in 1972, Cuba was reeling from an assault by the US government and the Organization of American States, in that they had virtually totally isolated Cuba in this hemisphere. They had a policy that no country was to have any relations with Cuba, and most of the countries of this hemisphere fell in line with that policy. The only two that defied them were Canada and Mexico. Everybody else fell in line. So when these four very small, the smallest then independent countries of the hemisphere, came together in 1972 to make that historic decision to say, look, US government, look, OAS, we are newly independent countries, but no one will tell us what our policy will be. We recognize Cuba as part of our Caribbean family of nations, and we will recognize them and have relations with them. That was very, 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 very historic, very instrumental, and that actually broke the ice. And then everybody else in the hemisphere, all the other countries, followed the lead of those four Caribbean countries and recognized Cuba. However, the US continues to apply this blockade or embargo to Cuba, and that has been going on now for 60 years. And President Donald Trump made it even worse, because days before he was to leave office in January of 2021, he took the very vindictive step of placing Cuba on the US State Department's list of countries that sponsor terrorism. So the irony of it all, here is this country that has suffered so much from terrorism against it, including that 6th of October bombing of the Cubana aircraft in Barbados, which was a precedent-setting act of terrorism. 25 years before 9/11, here were terrorists targeting a civilian airline full of passengers to commit an act of terrorism. So the irony of it is that Cuba, which has been the main victim of terrorism, I mean, Cuba has suffered from 713 terrorist acts. 3,500 Cubans have lost their lives because of terrorist attacks on Cuba. Cuba has suffered the loss of billions of dollars because of terrorism. Here's this country on the US's list. And that makes life very, very difficult for Cuba, because if you're on that list, banks and financial institutions and export institutions all around the world will have nothing to do with you. So CARICOM has, over the years, consistently carried out a campaign to say to the US, look, remove that embargo. Let our Cuban brothers and sisters, live freely and be able to develop freely and naturally. So we have done that for decades now. And even while we do that, we're trying to get all of those sanctions lifted from Cuba. We still continue to weave between those sanctions and still have our relationships with Cuba. So every 3 years, we have a CARICOM Cuba Heads of Government Summit. We also have um, regular conferences of the foreign ministers of CARICOM and Cuba. We have a trade and investment agreement, and we have all this technical cooperation. So, for example, we have Cuban coaches that work at the National Sports Council. We have the scholarship program. Many Barbadians have gone to Cuba for training in a whole range of disciplines. And we collaborate in relation to hurricanes and disaster preparation and so many other areas. But really and truly, the greatest thing that we in the Caribbean can do for Cuba is to upgrade our campaign to convince the United States government to remove that blockade.
Now, I think that a good place for us to start is by finding out exactly what happened during our research, if we don't already know, and looking into all the circumstances around, what is happening with Cuba. But as we look to commemorate the terrorist act on October 6th, I know that there is a documentary film that is going to be screened. Tell us more.
Oh, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. A brilliant documentary. It was produced by a filmmaker of Hispanic origin out of Los Angeles, Enrique Berumen, a veteran at his craft. And so he's done this new documentary on the Cubana terrorist tragedy. It's called Cubana 455. And I think one of the things that inspired him to do the documentary is that in 2016, when we were commemorating the 40th anniversary of the Cubana tragedy, we launched a campaign from Barbados to have the United Nations designate 6th of October the UN International Day Against Terrorism. So he heard about this. He actually came to Barbados. He interviewed persons like myself. And over the last few years, he has produced this brilliant documentary film, which will be premiered in Barbados on Friday of this week at the amphitheater of the Barbados National Museum at the Garrison at 8 p.m. I was looking at it last night. It's really brilliant. It just doesn't tell the specific story of the terrorist tragedy, but it puts it into its historical context. So it explains how events built to that terrorist tragedy in Barbados on the 6th of October, 1976. And this film is going to play a very important part in pushing forward the campaign to persuade the United Nations to designate, to say, look, there should be an international day on which the whole world mobilizes itself, comes together to denounce and fight against terrorism. And the perfect day is really the 6th of October. And so, in fact, there's going to be an international press conference as well on Wednesday from from the Hotel Pomarine here in Barbados. I think CBC will be covering that press
Yeah.
conference, but it's going up to the entire world, where we are relaunching the campaign to have the UN designate 6th October, that International Day Against
Okay.
Terrorism.
Yes, we certainly will share, and we will continue to share exactly how the celebrations will unfold. As always, thank you so much, Ambassador Comissiong, for coming in and sharing with us.
Thank you, Tisha. It was my pleasure.
Morning, morning, morning.